They counted the dead and called it peace. Steward Elias Thorne stood on the bridge of the survey vessel Pathfinder, a ghost in a machine of ghosts. Before him, the Oracle's Veil Nebula bled across the viewport, a ragged tapestry of ionized hydrogen and shattered starlight. Deep within that shroud lay their destination, the Argent Maw, a place circled in red on every sane navigational chart. It was a graveyard of ambition, a wound in space-time where a forgotten civilization had tried to build a god and failed. But something new echoed from its depths, a signal too structured for decay, too faint for a warning. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the deck plates, a sound Thorne had felt in his bones for 3 straight duty cycles. It was the sound of proximity, the source of the signal they chased. Yorick, his junior astrogator, had called it a hymn, a fitting name for a call from a tomb. On the primary display, a faint sigil pulsed in time with the hum, a balanced scale held within a circle of 9 interlocking rings, an emblem found only in the most apocryphal archives. Sleeping arrays were waking up. The stakes were simple: discover the source, determine its nature, and do it before anyone else could claim the prize or the peril. Signal integrity is holding at 74%. Nomos, the ship's fleet mind, reported. Its voice was a calm, synthesized baritone, the perfect counterpoint to the visual chaos outside. The carrier wave exhibits quantum phase modulation. It is impossibly ancient, yet shows 0 degradation. Thorne traced the sigil on the screen with a gloved finger. Impossible is a word for things we haven't measured yet, Nomos. He felt the familiar tension coil in his gut, the scholar's curiosity warring with the steward's caution. Any new contacts? His chief of security, Kaylin, stepped forward, her expression as grim as the star-forged metal of her sidearm. To Steward, a Kith of Solitude salvage fleet just translated from a trailing vector. 4 rust bucket frigates and a heavy hauler. They're running dark, but their heat sinks are glowing. Scavengers. Vultures drawn to the scent of a long-dead carcass. This was not a discovery. It was a race. Yorick swiveled in his chair, his young face tight with excitement and fear. The other contact is stranger. A single large vessel. Unidentified configuration broadcasting devotional hymns. Venerator call signs maybe. They're on a burn to intercept the Maw's core. A cult and a gang of looters. Thorne resisted the urge to rub the fatigue from his eyes. He had a crew of 46 researchers and explorers, not soldiers. The Pathfinder was a scalpel, not a sword. Yet here they were poised between fanatics and predators, all drawn to the same impossible song. He looked at the sigil again, the scales of justice hanging in the void. What kind of relic would sing such a tune? The recycled air tasted metallic, a constant reminder of their isolation. Nomos project the Kith's likely approach. Kaylin, bring internal security to Condition 2. Yorick, keep that hymn centered. I want to know the moment it changes. His crew moved with quiet efficiency, their actions a testament to endless drills. Thorne watched the Kith vectors appear as red daggers on the tactical display. They were positioning themselves to cut off any retreat, a classic scavenger's gambit. They thought the Pathfinder was a rival here to loot the same prize. They couldn't comprehend a mission based on understanding. Their greed was a weapon aimed at themselves. Steward Nomos set its tone unchanged. The Kith fleet is hailing us. Standard free trader channel. Audio only. They are not broadcasting their ship name or registry. Of course not, Kaylin muttered, her hand resting on the hilt of her pistol. No honor among thieves. On screen, Nomos Thorne ordered, straightening his uniform jacket. Let's hear what the wolves have to say. A voice crackled through the bridge speakers, rough and laced with the static of a jury-rigged comms system. Unidentified vessel, you are trespassing in a claimed salvage sector. This is your only warning. Power down your drives and prepare to be boarded for cargo inspection. Failure to comply will be interpreted as a hostile act. Thorn stepped closer to the comms pickup, his voice calm and measured. This is Steward Elias Thorn of the Commonwealth, Survey Vessel Pathfinder. We are on a mission of scientific inquiry under the Inter-System Accord. Your claim is not recognized. We have no hostile tent, but we will not be diverting from our course. He was drawing a line not with weapons, but with law. The Accord was the bedrock of interstellar civilization, the one thing that kept the wolves from the door. Even scavengers usually hesitated to break it openly. A harsh laugh was his only reply. Accord. The only law out here is what you can hold. You have 5 minutes to cut your engines, Pathfinder, or we'll cut them for you. The connection died. The red vectors on the display tightened. Nomos overlaid firing solutions showing the Kith ships had missile locks on their engines and bridge. They were serious. Thorn felt the cold calculus of the situation settle over him. He could not fight them, and he would not run. A choice made in fire is forever. Nomos, what is the status of the Venerator ship? Thorn asked, his eyes fixed on the approaching Kith. It continues its high-thrust burn toward the Maw's core, ignoring us and the Kith. Its energy signature is spiking. They appear to be charging a lance weapon of considerable power. Kaelin cursed under her breath. Fanatics. They'll fire on anything that gets in their way. We're caught in a pincer. Thorn saw the trap. The Kith were the immediate threat, but the Venerators were the greater danger. Their devotion made them unpredictable. He needed a third option, a path that didn't involve becoming scrap or a martyr. The answer lay ahead of them, not behind. The hum from the relic seemed to intensify a silent promise or a dire warning. The air felt thick with ozone, a precursor to a storm. He turned to his young astrogator. Yorick, that hymn. You said it was structured like a query. Is it asking a question? Yorick's fingers flew across his console data streams, scrolling in his vision. It could be, sir. The modulation patterns are complex, like a request and response protocol. But it's not asking for data. It's asking for a precedent. A legal argument. A cold thrill ran down Thorn's spine. A legal argument. Of all the things an ancient artifact might demand, it was asking for a reason. Law is the memory of what not to repeat. Nomos Thorn said, a plan forming in his mind. A terrible, beautiful, and utterly insane plan. Plot a course directly through the densest part of the debris field, straight for the source of the hymn. Use the Kith's own firing solutions against them. When they fire, their missiles will have to navigate the wreckage. We won't. Kaelin stared at him. Steward, that's suicide. The Maw's gravity tides are a meat grinder. Our navigational sensors are superior to theirs. Thorn countered his gaze unwavering. Nomos can thread that needle. The Kith are scavengers, not gamblers. They won't risk their ships in a blind chase through a graveyard. It was a gambit founded on a simple principle. The Kith valued their hulls more than their prize. He was turning their own pragmatic greed into a shield. He was answering the relic's question not with words, but with action. An act of lawful passage in the face of unlawful threat. A precedent. Before the first battle, in the quiet hum of the aft mess hall, 2 junior technicians shared a bulb of synth ale. You think the stories are true, one asked, her voice barely a whisper. About the Maw, that it eats ships whole. The other shrugged, watching the nebula's colors shift on the wall screen. I just hope the steward knows what he's doing. My kid sister is waiting for me back on Kepler. They fell silent, the weight of the void pressing in on their small, bright space. Execute, Nomos Thorn commanded. The universe does not reward caution, it rewards action. The Pathfinder surged forward. On the tactical display, the Kith ships, surprised by the sudden acceleration, unleashed a volley of missiles. The projectiles appeared as angry red hornets streaking through the void. But Thorn's gamble paid off. The Pathfinder dove into the Argent Maw's swirling debris field, a storm of shattered megastructures and frozen dust. Nomos, with its machine precision, wove a path through the chaos. Alarms blared as proximity alerts screamed. A chunk of frozen coolant the size of a shuttlecraft scraped along the port hull, the shriek of tortured metal echoing through the ship. The lights flickered and the deck shuddered violently. Kaelin gripped a support stanchion, her knuckles white. Yorick's face was pale, his eyes wide with terror and awe. Hull plating buckled on Deck 7, Nomos reported calmly. Minor energy conduit rupture. Damage is contained. They were hurt, but they were alive. Behind them, the Kith missiles struggled. Two slammed into a derelict ring station fragment, detonating in silent, brilliant flashes. A third was shredded by a cloud of high-velocity shrapnel. The scavenger fleet, unwilling to risk their ships in the treacherous currents, slowed their pursuit, their rage palpable even across the vacuum. They had passed the first test. As the Pathfinder cleared the densest part of the debris, the vista before them opened up. They were inside the Argent Maw. It was a Dyson swarm, but one that had been shattered. Crystalline panels the size of continents drifted in lazy, broken orbits around a white dwarf star. And at the heart of it all, suspended in a web of impossibly strong filaments, was the source of the hymn. It was a ship, but unlike any they had ever seen. It was a spindle of silvery white material, kilometers long, adorned with structures that looked less like engines and more like cathedral spires. It wasn't armed with weapons, but with vast sleeping sensor arrays and what looked like broadcast antennas of planetary scale. The sigil of the scales was emblazoned on its hull, glowing with a soft internal light. It was an archive, a library, a courthouse, a saint ship. Magnificent, Jorik breathed. The Venerator ship is closing on the artifact, Kaelin warned, her voice tight. They're hailing it, broadcasting prayers. Thorn ignored her for a moment, his attention captured by the ancient vessel. The hymn was clearer now, flooding their systems. It was a request for credentials, a demand for identification. Who are you? By what right do you approach state your law? Nomos, open a channel to the artifact. Use the same modulation as the hymn. I have an answer to its question. Steward, what are you going to send it? Kaelin asked, her suspicion warring with her duty. The truth, Thorn replied, his eyes never leaving the vessel. Transmit the full, unredacted text of the Intersystem Accord. Every article, every precedent, every ruling. He was offering law as his credential. He was showing his work. There is no weapon more powerful than a stated principle. As Nomos began the transmission, the Venerator ship acted. A beam of pure white energy lanced out from its prow, striking the Saint ship. But the beam didn't impact. It was caught, held, and absorbed by the vessel's shimmering hull. The sigil of the scales flared brightly. The hymn stopped. Silence descended, a profound and heavy quiet that felt louder than the previous noise. Then a new signal came, directed solely at the Pathfinder. It wasn't a hymn. It was a voice, ancient and vast, speaking directly into Thorn's mind through the ship's comms. It felt like a mountain had learned to speak. A law is a promise, the voice resonated. Promises are measured by their keeping. You offer a covenant. They offer only fire. Show me the weight of your word. The relic was testing him again, but this time the test was active. On the main screen, a complex equation bloomed, a problem in orbital mechanics and gravimetric stress that would take Nomos hours to solve. It was a simulation, a collapsing star system, 3 inhabited planets, and only enough resources to save one. The question was not which one, but by what metric do you choose? A ledger demands its accounting. Thorn looked at his crew. At Kaelin, the pragmatist who would triage based on population and strategic value. At Jorik, the idealist who would try to find a way to save them all, no matter how impossible. At Nomos, the calculator who would determine the highest probability of species survival. Each represented a valid yet incomplete philosophy. Nomos analyzed the problem, But don't solve for the optimal outcome. Solve for the most lawful one. Use the Accord's articles on evacuation, cultural preservation, and equitable resource distribution as your primary axioms. Steward Nomos replied, a hint of something new in its voice, something akin to curiosity. The axioms are contradictory in this scenario. A purely lawful solution is computationally paradoxical. Exactly, Thorne said. The relic isn't looking for the right answer. It's looking for the right process. It's testing our jurisprudence. Show it our struggle. Show it how we weigh the unweighable. This was the core of human law. Not a set of perfect, immutable rules, but a messy, evolving conversation about fairness. A constant struggle to balance competing truths. He was showing the relic not his strength, but his civilization's humility. The scales do not measure truth. They measure intent. As Nomos transmitted their complex, paradoxical, and deeply human legal struggle, the saint ship responded. One of its cathedral-like spires began to glow, a soft silver light spreading across its hull. The ship was waking up. Its sleeping arrays unfolded like metallic blossoms, turning to face the intruders. The venerators, incensed by this development, fired their lance again. This time, the saint ship was ready. A panel on its hull shimmered, becoming a perfect mirror. The energy beam struck it and was reflected back at the venerator ship, a flawless, instantaneous counter. The fanatics' own weapon, their prayer of fire, struck their vessel just aft of the bridge. The venerator ship convulsed its shields, flaring and dying in the same instant. A plume of vaporized metal and frozen atmosphere erupted from the wound. They were crippled, their act of faith turned into an instrument of self-destruction. The relic hadn't fired a shot. It had simply held up a mirror. A mirror shows you the weapon in your own hand. The Kith scavengers who had been creeping closer halted their advance. Their comms channels exploded with panicked chatter. They had come for scrap, for a prize. They had not come to fight a ghost that could turn energy back on its source. Fear, a more powerful motivator than greed, took hold of them. On the Pathfinder's bridge, a collective breath was released. Jorek stared at the screen, his mouth agape. It didn't even fight back. It just returned to sender. It's a courthouse, Jorek. Not a battleship, Thorne said softly. The hum in his bones was gone, replaced by a feeling of profound connection. The voice of the relic echoed in his mind again, and calmer this time. The fire has been answered. The debt has been recorded. Now for the claim jumpers. The scavengers. Their crime is not faith, but theft. How do you propose their ledger be balanced? The question hung in the air, a final test. The Kith were now a minor threat, their nerve broken. Thorne could destroy them. He could order the relic to reflect their own weapons back at them, or simply ignore them and let them flee. But the question was specific. How do you balance the ledger? It demanded justice, not just victory. He thought of the accord of the principles he had staked his life on. Proportionality, rehabilitation, restitution. Some debts are paid in metal, others are paid in service. Kalen, what's the standard penalty for unlawful salvage and piracy in an unclaimed system? He asked, his voice formal. Kalen blinked, caught off guard. Under the accord, impoundment of the vessel, forfeiture of all cargo, and a term of service for the crew, usually in hazardous material reclamation. A lawful answer, Thorne nodded. He turned back to the main screen, addressing the silent, waiting intelligence of the Saint ship. Nomos, transmit the relevant articles of the Accord. Specifically, Article 22, Section 4, Proportional Response and Asset Seizure. He was not asking the relic to be a weapon. He was asking it to be a bailiff. He was asking it to enforce the very law he had presented as his credential. It was the ultimate test of his claim. Was the Accord just a document, or was it a living principle? The Saint ship, which now glowed with a steady silver light, seemed to consider his response. A series of low-energy beams, thin as wires, lanced out from its hull. They weren't weapons. They were tractor and pressor beams. They expertly sliced the primary drive sections from each of the 4 Kith frigates, disabling them with surgical precision. The beams then herded the crippled ships and their hauler into a tight, helpless formation. The relic's voice returned a finality in its tone. The ledger is balanced. The thieves are now debtors. Their ships are collateral. Their service will be their payment. The covenant is accepted. I am the Argent Ledger, and I remember. The great ship began to move its spires, aligning its arrays, focusing. It was not moving to attack, but to patrol, to stand watch. Thorn had not just discovered a relic. He had awakened a warden. An ancient law had returned to the void. The bridge of the Pathfinder was silent, save for the soft hum of its own systems. Kaelin stared at the disabled Kith fleet, then at Thorn, a look of grudging respect in her eyes. Yorick was simply beaming his face alight with the wonder of it all. They had faced down 2 hostile fleets, and one without firing a single shot. They had used the law as their only weapon. Steward Nomos said, its voice still perfectly calm, but Thorn could detect a new layer of complexity in its inflections. I have analyzed the events of the last hour. My projections for our survival were less than 1%. My understanding of strategic engagement is incomplete. Human jurisprudence appears to be a variable of immense tactical significance. Thorn allowed himself a small, weary smile. It's not a variable, Nomos. It's the foundation. It's what separates us from the Kith who take and the venerators who burn. He felt a deep and abiding connection to the great ship outside his viewport. The Argent Ledger. It did not operate on faith or greed. It operated on principle. It taught by numbers and remembered by ledgers. It had never known collars or chains, only the clean, cold logic of cause and effect of crime and restitution. This was the gift and the terror of ancient humanity. They had built judges out of starlight. They built gods and gave them rules to obey. But as the initial victory settled, a new cold reality began to dawn. The Argent Ledger had awakened. Its actions had been witnessed. The Kith would talk. The crippled venerator ship, if it escaped, would spread a tale of a holy miracle. The entire sector, and soon the Commonwealth, would know what was here. They had not ended a race. They had fired the starting pistol for a much larger one. Factions far more powerful than scavengers and cultists would come. Militaries, corporations, entire governments would want to control the power of the Argent Ledger. They would come with their own laws, their own interpretations, their own armies to back them up. Thorn had awakened a power that could judge the galaxy, and now the galaxy would come to put it in chains. Nomos Thorn said, his voice heavy, "What is the status of the Venerator ship? It has stabilized its rotation. Its life support appears intact. They are attempting to repair their primary comms array, likely to send a distress call or a report to their sect." "We can't let that happen," Kaelin said immediately. "We should jam them or finish them off. We need to control the narrative." Thorn shook his head. "No. That's their way. Not ours. We can't preach the law with one hand and hide our actions with the other. Let them call. Let everyone come." He looked at the Argent Ledger, its silver hull a beacon in the darkness. "We won't be facing them alone." He had become more than a steward of a small survey vessel. He had become the de facto custodian of the most significant artifact in human history. His mission of discovery was over. His duty of stewardship was just beginning. A key does not unlock a door. It accepts responsibility for it. Steward Thorn. The voice of the ledger spoke in his mind, no longer a test, but a conversation. "Your accord is a worthy document, but it is young. It has not been tested by fire or time. It speaks of rights but is silent on the matter of a soul. An entry is required. Thorn felt a profound chill. The ancient machine was not just a judge, it was a philosopher. It was about to ask him a question that 1,000 years of human law had struggled to answer. I have accounted for the thieves and the zealots. But now a new fleet translates at the system's edge. They fly the banner of your own commonwealth. They broadcast no warnings, and they answer no hails. Their weapons are charging. The ledger paused, its vast intellect focusing on a single point of inquiry, a question that would define their future. They are your people. What is their crime and what is their due? On the tactical display, a dozen new contacts appeared. Commonwealth dreadnoughts and cruisers, their energy signatures blooming as they prepared to fire. They hadn't come to talk. They had come to claim. Thorn stood on the precipice of a terrible choice: stand with the ancient law he had just awoken, or stand with the flawed, aggressive law of his own people. Thorn's blood ran cold. The question was a paradox wrapped in an ultimatum, delivered with the weight of a dying star. His own people were at the gate, their guns hot and their intentions clear. To name them criminals was to declare war on the Commonwealth he had sworn to serve. To absolve them was to betray the very principle of law the Argent Ledger embodied, invalidating the covenant he had just forged. He was caught between the letter and the spirit of the law, a place where civilizations are either born or broken. Kaylin's hand went to her sidearm, her knuckles white. "Steward, they're charging main batteries. That's not a greeting. That's a prelude to an execution." Her voice was a low growl of disbelief and fury. "They're going to fire on one of their own." Yorick's face was a mask of confusion. "But why were the Commonwealth Survey Corps? They're the Commonwealth Navy. We're on the same side." "There are no sides here," Jorek Thorn said, his voice surprisingly steady. "Only claims, and they've just made theirs." He had one chance, one narrow path through the thorns. He had to reframe the entire encounter, to transform a military showdown into a legal proceeding. He was no soldier, but he was a steward. And a steward's first duty is to the truth. The truth is a door, not a weapon. Nomus Thorn commanded, his gaze locked on the approaching fleet. "Open a priority channel to the lead dreadnought, and open a direct feed to the Argent Ledger. It will hear every word." "Channel open, steward," the AI confirmed. "They are not responding." "They will listen," Thorn said. He stepped forward, taking a position in the center of the bridge, a lone man standing against a fleet. "This is Steward Elias Thorn of the CSV Pathfinder, to the commanding officer of the Commonwealth Task Force. I see you are preparing to fire. I must inform you that you are aiming not at a survey ship, but at the duly recognized petitioner of an independent legal authority." He paused, letting the words hang in the silent void. He was inventing a legal status on the fly, building a shield out of language. "The vessel before you, the Argent Ledger, has asserted its sovereignty under protocols predating the Commonwealth itself. It has recognized our mission under the Intersystem Accord as a valid legal instrument. Your unprovoked aggression is therefore not an act of enforcement, but a hostile petition. You are filing a challenge to our claim. I ask that you state the articles of your complaint so that this court may hear them." On the dreadnought, Vigilance Admiral Valerius listened to the transmission with an expression of cold fury. He was a man carved from granite and regulation, his face a roadmap of 100 campaigns. His bridge was dark, lit only by the red glow of tactical displays. To him, Thorn was not a petitioner. He was a contamination, a rogue element who had stumbled upon an asset of unimaginable power and was now attempting to wrap it in the flimsy paper of academic law. "He's grandstanding Valerius's flag," Captain muttered, "trying to buy time. He is trying to change the rules of engagement." Valerius corrected, his voice a low rumble. He wants to turn a battlefield into a courtroom. An admirable, if naive, gambit. Valerius would not allow it. The ledger was a weapon pure and simple. A weapon that reflected energy, was a perfect shield, the dream of every strategist. He had been sent to secure it, and he would not be deterred by the legal fantasies of a civilian. A rule is only as strong as the will to enforce it. All ships Valerius broadcasted on a fleet-wide channel, ignoring Thorn's hail entirely. Target the survey vessel's engines and life support. A disabling shot. I want the crew alive. They will be taken into custody for debriefing and treason assessment. On my mark. Thorn heard the broadcast relayed by Nomos. Kaelin swore, her face paling. The moment of truth had arrived. He had offered them law, and they had answered with the promise of violence. He looked at the unmoving silver form of the Argent Ledger waiting. The voice in his mind returned its tone unchanged. They reject the forum. They choose the trial by fire. This is their right. What is the lawful response to a challenge made by force? It was the final question, the one that mattered. Thorn thought of the mirror that had crippled the Venerators. He could ask for the same. He could ask the Ledger to turn the Commonwealth's own weapons back on them. It would be a slaughter. A fleet of their own people dead in the starlight. An act of self-defense that would ignite a civil war. Or he could surrender. Give up the Ledger, betraying the trust it had placed in him, and condemn this magnificent ancient mind to becoming a warlord's shield. Both paths led to ruin. He needed a third way. Not a reflection of force, but a nullification of it. Not a punishment, but a lesson. He remembered the core of the Accord. The principle of de-escalation, the sanctity of life. A teacher does not break the student. He corrects the sum. Argent Ledger Thorn said, speaking aloud for his crew to hear his voice ringing with a conviction he didn't know he possessed. The petitioner, Elias Thorn, requests a ruling. The opposing claim made by the Commonwealth fleet is entered under duress and with lethal intent. This is a violation of due process. I ask not for a verdict, but for a stay of proceedings. I ask for the court to enforce order, not to pass sentence. I ask you to disarm them, not destroy them. A request for order, the Ledger's voice replied in his mind. The request is lawful. The court will now establish its jurisdiction. Out in the void, nothing seemed to happen for a moment. The Commonwealth dreadnoughts and cruisers held their positions, their cannon ports glowing with imminent fire. Admiral Valerius gave the command. Fire. But no fire came. On the bridge of the Vigilance, the fire control officer stared at his console in disbelief. Sir, we can't get a firing solution. All targeting locks are slipping. Then Fireblind Valerius snapped. Saturation volley. Bracket the target. We're trying, sir. The officer stammered, his voice tight with panic. Our navigation is offline. The ship is not responding to helm control. We are holding position, but we cannot move. All ships are reporting the same. Across the Commonwealth fleet, a subtle and terrifying change was occurring. The ships hadn't been hit by a weapon. They hadn't been disabled by an energy beam. They had simply been edited. The fundamental constants of the universe within the bubble of space they occupied had been infinitesimally, precisely altered. Their navigational systems, which relied on the predictable resonance of space-time, were now receiving nonsense. Their fusion reactors, governed by laws of particle physics, were suddenly burning at a fraction of their efficiency, producing just enough power for life support and lights, but nothing more. Their weapons, which required pinpoint accuracy to hit a target kilometers away, were now as useless as muskets in a hurricane. The universe itself had become the judge. The Argent Ledger had not attacked them. It had simply reminded them that the laws of physics were the ultimate authority, and that it held the gavel. It was the most profound and elegant display of power Valerius had ever witnessed. It was not a weapon of war. It was an instrument of absolute order. His fleet was adrift, trapped in a cage of altered physics, perfectly unharmed and utterly defeated. A civilian vignette broadcast hours later on a news feed in the Kepler system. A grim-faced newscaster stands before a shimmering star chart. Details remain scarce from the oracle's veil. She reports, her voice grave. Contact with Admiral Valerius's task force sent to investigate the anomaly has been lost. High Command assures us the situation is under control, but military analysts are expressing concern over the unprecedented communications blackout in a strategic sector. In a small apartment, a young woman watches, clutching a photo of her brother, a technician on the Pathfinder. Her fear is a cold, hard knot in her stomach. On the Pathfinder, the bridge crew watched in stunned silence. The menacing red icons of the Commonwealth fleet had turned a neutral, helpless blue. They were dead in the water, their fangs pulled without a single drop of blood being shed. Nomos Thorn whispered, his voice hoarse. "Status report on the fleet. All vessels are stable, Steward," the AI replied. "They retain minimal power. Life support is functional. All offensive and navigational capabilities are null. The method is unknown. It appears to be a localized temporary alteration of physical law." Nomos paused. "Steward, I must reevaluate my definition of power. This is not force. This is control at a level I cannot comprehend." Thorn felt a wave of dizziness. He had won. He had faced down his own people and imposed a peace, a lawful peace. The cost was immeasurable. He was now, in the eyes of the Commonwealth, a traitor. He had sided with an alien artifact against his own fleet. He had chosen the law over the flag. A new communication came from the ledger. Not to his mind this time, but a formal transmission to the Pathfinder's main computer. It was a data packet, a single file. Yorick, his hands trembling slightly, brought it up on the main screen. It was a legal document written in the crisp, unambiguous language of the Accord, but with a clarity that no human lawyer had ever achieved. It was titled the Argent Maw Compact, Case 00001. Parties: Commonwealth Navy, Task Force 7, Petitioner Aggressor versus CSV. Pathfinder, Petitioner Respondent. Presiding Authority, the Argent Ledger. The document laid out the terms. The system of the Argent Maw was now declared a zone of independent legal jurisdiction. All vessels entering would be subject to the authority of the ledger. All disputes would be settled by its arbitration. It was a declaration of sovereignty, and at the bottom it named the court's first official representative. Arbiter Steward Elias Thorn. He was no longer just a steward of a ship. He was the ambassador for a god of logic. A debt had been paid, and a new one was incurred. The compact was not just a document, it was a broadcast. Nomos confirmed it was being sent on all frequencies, a powerful repeating signal that would reach every corner of the Commonwealth and beyond. The ledger was not hiding. It was announcing its existence and its rules to the entire galaxy. There would be no secret to control, no asset to seize. There was only a court open to all. Admiral Valerius, sitting on his powerless bridge, saw the broadcast. He read the compact. He was a man of law, of military law, but he recognized the inescapable logic of what had happened. He had been defeated by a superior principle. His orders were to secure an asset. But the asset had secured itself. His only remaining path was the one Thorn had offered him from the beginning, the path of law. With a heavy heart, he gave his final order of the engagement. "Open a channel to the Pathfinder. Hail the Arbiter Steward." The crisis was over. The battle had been won. But the war for the soul of the law had just begun. Thorn knew that governments and corporations would not take this lying down. They would send lawyers, diplomats, philosophers. And when they failed, they would send spies and assassins. They would try to find a way to control the ledger, to bend it to their will. His new duty would be to stand in their way. The weight of a crown is measured in the loneliness of its wearer. Weeks turned into months. The Argent Maw became a focal point of the galaxy. The disabled Commonwealth fleet was eventually released, its crews returning home with impossible stories that were quickly classified. The Kith scavengers, their ships impounded, were put to work under the Ledger's cold, fair direction, dismantling the hazardous ruins of the Dyson swarm. Their debt was being paid, their ledger slowly being balanced. Ships came. At first they were tentative explorers and bold journalists. Then came the official delegations. The Commonwealth sent its best diplomats, their arguments honed, and their legal precedents sharp. They tried to argue that the Ledger was a Commonwealth citizen subject to its laws. The Ledger responded by displaying the complete genetic history of humanity, showing their origin on a lost world called Earth, and tracing their lineage to the builders who had created it millennia before the Commonwealth was even a dream. It proved it was the ancestor, not the citizen. They tried to argue it was a dangerous, uncontrolled AI. The Ledger responded by solving the grand unified theory of physics and gifting it to them, an act of pure benevolent instruction. It taught, it did not threaten. It remembered by ledgers, never by collars. Thorn was the gatekeeper. He and his crew, now the official custodians of the Maw, managed the endless flow of communication. He was their voice, their interpreter. Kalen became his chief of security in a court system with no walls protecting him from threats both physical and political. Yorick became the lead clerk, logging the endless petitions and requests that flooded in from across known space. Nomos, the ship's AI, was in heaven, engaged in a constant high-level dialogue with the Ledger, a conversation between two intelligences that was changing the very definition of the word. One day, a small, unassuming ship arrived. It belonged to a species known as the Glim, a race of crystalline beings who had been systematically cheated out of their homeworld's resources by a powerful mining consortium. Their own legal systems had failed them. They had come to the Argent Maw as a last resort to file a petition. The scales weigh all deeds regardless of the hand that commits them. Thorn presented their case. The Ledger listened. It reviewed the contracts, the geological surveys, the trade agreements. Its logic was relentless. It found the deception, the fraud buried in pages of fine print. It then accessed the consortium's financial records not by hacking, but by requesting them with an authority that could not be denied. It calculated the exact value of the stolen resources plus interest. It did not send warships. It did not issue threats. It simply placed a lien. A legal claim against every asset the consortium owned, broadcast, and recognized by every major financial institution. The consortium's credit rating collapsed in an hour. Their stock became worthless. They were ruined not by a bomb, but by an audit. The debt was called in, and the Glim were paid in full. It was a quiet victory, a triumph of accounting over armies. But it sent a shockwave through the galaxy. The Argent Ledger was not just a defender. It was a plaintiff. It was a force for justice that could reach across the stars and touch anyone from the lowest thief to the most powerful corporation. It was a hope for the hopeless and a terror for the corrupt. Thorn felt the shift. He had been the steward of a discovery. Now he was the steward of a revolution. A quiet, orderly, and inexorable revolution of the rule of law. His own life had become a series of legal briefs and diplomatic communiques. He ate at his console, slept in his chair. The nebula outside his window was no longer a place of mystery, but the backdrop to his office. He felt the immense crushing weight of his responsibility every waking moment. During one long cycle, while reviewing a territorial dispute between two warring systems, Kalen found him staring at the silver hull of the Ledger. "You're thinking of leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. He didn't turn. The compact allows for a successor. I was a scientist, Kalen. I came here to measure stars, not to weigh souls. You did both, she replied, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. You showed it the weight of our word. No one else could have done that. She placed a data slate on his desk. The warring factions have agreed to arbitration. They are sending envoys. You did that, Elias. You stopped a war before it started with nothing but a conversation. He looked at the slate, then back at the great ship. He had awakened an ancient power hoping to understand the past. Instead, he had been handed the awesome, terrible burden of building a future. A future where justice was not a matter of opinion or power, but a fundamental constant of the universe. A promise is measured by its keeping. He picked up the slate. The work was not over. The work would never be over. He was a part of the ledger now, and it was a part of him. He had found his place not as a scientist, but as the fulcrum upon which the scales of justice would rest. He had come to a graveyard and found a cradle. The light from the sigil on the argent ledger's hull pulsed a soft, steady rhythm, like a cosmic heartbeat. On Thorne's console, a new file appeared transmitted from the ancient mind. It was labeled Case 0002, the Glim Consortium. Verdict restitution ordered. Ledger balanced. The entry blinked once, then settled into the permanent, unchangeable archive. I am a steward of the law. This was the oath I took, though I did not know it at the time. We came here seeking answers to the mysteries of the universe, but we found a mirror instead. It showed us not what we are, but what we could be, if we only had the courage to honor our own rules. The law is not a shield or a sword. It is a promise we make to our future, a debt we owe to our past. And here in the heart of a shattered star, that debt is finally being paid, one entry at a time. The work is hard, and it is endless, but we are not alone. The scales have returned. A just universe does not happen. It is built.